everyone. This is Aakash Jaiswal, and I welcome you to Capgemini and Tea Hub's Innovation Coffee Table Podcast, a series of conversations where we invite industry leaders and get their diverse perspectives on various aspects of innovation. I'm the host for your podcast, and my panelists for today come from two diverse stakeholder groups themselves. One comes from a corporate enterprise setup, and one comes from the startup setup. Although, while we are speaking, we'll also know that one of our panelists from corporate enterprises has also had the best of both worlds while starting up and being in the venture space. And these stakeholders have been riding the AI wave and, in fact, pioneering it with much elan. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you our panelists. We have Balasubramaniam Natarajan, also fondly called Bala. Bala is Vice President at Capgemini and he is leading Capgemini's AI and analytics initiatives. Prior to Capgemini, Bala has had a fascinating career spanning domains such as corporate advisory, product management, knowledge services, and even co-founding his health tech venture. And Bala, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Aakash.
And my second panelist tonight is Vishnu Ramesh. Vishnu is on a mission to democratize information access through his startup Subtl.AI. It is an AI assistant that can answer user queries by fetching information from different games, such as document, videos, other knowledge bases, and sources such as this. And his product are being used by some of the largest enterprises in the country today. And for our audiences who would want to just go and check out and know more about Vishnu and his venture, his firm is spelled as SUBTL without the E. So pretty subtle naming, Vishnu, I must say. Welcome to the podcast, Vishnu.
Thanks, Aakash. Hi, Bala. Glad to be here and really looking forward to interacting with both of you.
Same here, Vishnu. Well, you know what? Let me sort of jump into it, right? And typically, I would have introduced this topic as the cliched phrase, "Unless someone has been living under a rock, you would have definitely heard of this." But I think that even for those of us living under a rock, this topic has influenced them, this topic has reached them, or is bound to reach them and transform their ways like no other, right? So we are in the middle of a transformation and evolution, and this has taken the world by storm. We cannot stop experimenting with it, thinking about it, and even talking about it. And the potential that it holds is bound to keep many of us awake at night. And oh yes, I mean there are no prizes for guessing. We are talking about generative AI and how the present is and how the future of it lies about. And both my panelists dabble with it as a part of their day jobs. So I have the best minds to speak from both perspectives, right? From a corporate enterprise perspective as well as startups. So right off the bat, Bala, so my first question to you and to get your thoughts on being in the middle of action, how do you imagine generative AI to change the way our clients are currently operating across industries? Because you are having conversations with them, the questions that they pose to you and the concerns. So how do you see the clients and their work changing through generative AI in the coming time?
I'd say, first up, right, there's a lot of, let's say, hype about generative AI now, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm sure Vishnu would also acknowledge, see, language models have existed for many years. Okay, what has sort of changed the perception or sort of raised or stoked the hype factor really is the fact that we have now got a way to add a consumer-friendly layer to a large language model. So, as you know, already GPT-3 was what ChatGPT was. There's already GPT-4, but remember that you should also look backward. There's been GPT-1, 1.5, 2, and so on. So that's point number one, right? So absolutely, the consumer interface adds this ability to democratize it, reach a larger number of people, which is evidenced with all the rise in user base for this. This is the fastest rising user base in recorded history, right, for IT products or applications. Now, to your question on customers, potentially they could look at it in two ways, Aakash, right? One is for, first of all, eat your own dog food. Mm-hmm. How can you apply, the techniques that Gen AI, enables you to use so easily for your own internal purposes? Sure. It could be enterprise support functions like your HR, finance, legal, IT, and so on. where not just look at coding productivity. Of course, there will be coding productivity impact, which will be beneficial, which a lot of us are trying to experiment with and understand what is the scale of that productivity. But at the same time, larger impact on customer community which we serve, right, which are large enterprises or smaller ones, they could potentially use these to actually refresh their entire offer base, their solutions in their portfolio. I would even say so much as to disrupt some of their existing business models. It really depends on which industry you're talking about. Obviously, impact is varying by sector, but it's also a function of our imagination, right? In some sense, because what has happened, everybody talks about Moore's law, but the last few years, completely unnoticed or under the radar for people who are not in this field day in day out, there's been a lot of progress. I would even say, rapid progress on the algorithmic, choices that people have today. And combine that with the power of the Moore's law is what we are all experiencing now. Let me pause here and see whether you have more questions, or Vishnu wants to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I would like to add in, Bala. I definitely agree with what you said. I think the way people are working has already changed because of how we've all gotten access to ChatGPT as consumers. Now the next step is like, hey, how do enterprises leverage this? Right. So that's something that companies like Subtl are doing right now. Actually, even before I get to Subtl, you're absolutely right. The architecture, right, in GPT, T is basically transformers. I know a lot about this space because my chief scientist is actually very close friends with the researcher that came out with it. There's a 2017 paper called Attention is All You Need. That's when they pioneered the transformer architecture. And since then, Subtl.AI's models, or even like OpenAI and Google, all of their models are based on this transformer architecture, which is where like this phenomenal intelligence is coming, right? Where you're able to maintain some kind of context and then also do different tasks based on that. So, like you said, the next step now is like, okay, how do enterprises use this? Right. So that's where like there's a mix of two things that's happening. Number one, companies like Subtl coming into the picture. So our LLMs are actually 1,000 times smaller compared to GPT-3. Becomes very easy for us to deploy this internally on-premise for enterprise. And we've already proven this for the toughest enterprises, I would say, in India, which is banks. So what we're essentially doing is we're now able to create this bridge between the knowledge enterprises have and then the LLMs so that they can leverage access. And our core tech itself would understand any questions you ask and then pinpoint answers instantly. And that's essentially going to disrupt the way search happens. So the cool thing that we're seeing right now with a lot of our customers and even like paid POCs that we're doing with some top enterprises, Google and Microsoft are now going and telling them that, look, we'll deploy the LLM for you personally. So on your private instance that only you will have exclusive access to. So that part of the equation is now starting to get solved for these enterprises, where they're like, hey, we have the LLM in-house that we can now leverage. The next challenge is like, okay, how do they leverage their knowledge on top of this? Right. So Subtl is essentially able to become that bridge for them now. So the two key concerns that enterprises have, which is something we're seeing in our sales process also, is number one, how do I make sure my data is secure? Right. So when the LLMs sit in-house, that's something that's solved for. Number two, how do I make sure I get trusted answers every single time? ChatGPT, as of today, has a hallucination rate of 9%. That basically means for every question that you ask, 9% of the time it's going to be factually inaccurate. Because these models are very predictive in nature. What they do is they learn all the historical information of the world and then they try to create answers based on that. And sometimes that can be wrong. The same way as a human, I can be wrong. If I read a 1,000-page document maybe last week and now Aakash is asking me a question on that document, I might be a little wrong, right? With respect to how, because I wouldn't have the perfect memory. So companies like Subtl are now coming up that are able to create that whole perfect memory concept, essentially ensuring that the hallucination completely drops to zero. So I can gladly confirm that, with companies like us, there are now ways to get fully trustable answers from these LLMs so that they can be used to really optimize the workforce. The last thing I'll say before going ahead is the impact. So, of course, the base impact is time saved, right? Like we're saving SBI over 33 million hours a year as of today with the help of our stack. But that's not the impact. The impact is actually cutting out overheads in core processes like customer support and training onboarding. We realized that with technology like this, employee ramp up periods can come down by 60%. If it takes you 3 months to onboard an employee, with tech like this, it'll now come down to 1 month. Because as a new joinee, from day one, I have access to a chat based solution that lets me talk to the entire enterprise knowledge to get my questions answered. I don't have to wait for anyone to answer, right? Or escalation comes down, or like turnaround times for customer support significantly comes down at the human level. Which even today, if you look at all the customer support ops, anywhere between like 50 to 80% of that operation still has to be done by people, right? Like that's an element that will never change. What would happen is these assistants would start making people more productive.
And here is where I would want to come to Balasar and take his perspectives, right? Balasar, one area that has been called out by Vishnu is hallucination. And this is an area of concern amongst other areas that generative AI is currently posing, right? And the risks or the potential ramifications of the same are in front of us to see, right? Deepfakes and so on and so forth. So when it comes to these challenges, right, and even there could be some ethical concerns, how does one balance the benefits? And I know that at Capgemini uh, we have our own generative AI guidelines and AI ethics work that we have done to ensure how can we put our best foot forward in those cases. So, how do you balance the fine line between the benefits and the challenges it poses this technology at our hands?
I think first of all, Akash, what happens is this is the downside of democratizing access, right? People have to understand some very, very basic, principles of what this area is about. People think that, first of all, even using the word hallucination, I don't know how much will be understood by our target audience, right? Vishnu is absolutely right with the term, but we probably got to explain to our friends here that, essentially, what is the LLM really trying to do? It's actually not intelligent, right? It's just trying to identify and mimic patterns in language that it already parses once, right? So you got a corpus of private knowledge that Subtl and some of these other companies are trying to help customers with. All these LLMs are doing, these large language models, which are themselves based on the transformer technology which Vishnu alluded to, right? They do a great job of identifying and mimicking the patterns in language that they read once, but they have absolutely no underlying understanding of what they are reading. They're just manipulating language patterns, okay, text patterns. They're just characters to them. The problem is that ChatGPT, because it is able to write very well, right, the output layer, it sounds incredibly convincing, but it can be absolutely incorrect.
Sure.
Okay, so this is what we are referring to as hallucination. Now, how do you tackle that as a problem? There are 2-3 ways or approaches to do it, right? So whenever you're implementing these Gen AI based solutions or techniques, there have to be some guardrails, right? What are those guardrails? So usually, again, I will typically allude back to what Capgemini has a code of ethics for AI. Not because ChatGPT has come, we've had this code of ethics for some time. What do we, prescribe to our customers? First of all, your AI should be fair. There should be no biases in your underlying data or language. If you keep on showing an LLM that everybody who's a loan officer is a guy, white male, then it will build biases into what it recommends as answers also.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Similarly, the AI that you build also has to be explainable and transparent.
Sure.
Yeah? Same way, it should be sustainable. I mean, many people probably are running queries on ChatGPT without understanding how energy guzzling these LLMs are. You remember Vishnu was alluding to how Subtl tries to use very small, LLM sizes. extremely crucial for enterprise use. You cannot really, these large language models in their base layer have spent probably millions of dollars to get to those versions. Okay. But today we have enough progress where we can make them much, much more economical, much, much more energy efficient. So there is a cost element to it, there's a carbon element to it. So some of these principles are what we embed in our code of ethics, and we recommend this in the playbook for our customers who are trying to do these Gen AI journeys, right? Of course, we've seen a sharp increase in inquiries because of ChatGPT. Like Vishnu said, we're all riding that wave. When more active users show up, it will also be there. But I will also tell you that this has pluses and minuses, right? The biggest positive I see out of this is, while people like Vishnu and Bala are going out to market, and in some sense, actually, we are evangelizing this tech now, right? Maybe Vishnu's been doing it for, many years now. The advantage we get, the tailwind we get, is really players like Microsoft are doing us a big favor by embedding Gen AI into the Office 365 suite.
Yes.
In our portfolio in Capgemini, we go and sell to customers the more traditional business intelligence and visualization tools. And I keep telling our customer, it is never about one technology versus another. The biggest competitor to BI tech is the humble Microsoft Excel. The moment you've turbocharged it with Gen AI, you've immediately got a user footprint of pretty much the entire world, or a third of the world which has got access to computer devices. Every computer, probably even Mac has Windows OS and running in some of those devices. So if you can imagine that entire community of connected humans all using Gen AI implicitly. Some of them may not even know that they're using Gen AI because there'll be newer people coming who are aware, but the older people probably are not even going to be transparent to it. They will continue to use search, some of the functionalities that Vishnu was talking about as a part of a Microsoft Word, a Microsoft PowerPoint. When ChatGPT came out and when Microsoft announced this O365 introduction, the biggest sigh of relief was from some of our pre-sales people, because when we make our client pitches, we desperately struggle to get images which are not copyrighted by somebody else.
Sure.
So now this is going to be, as simple as typing a plain English language search, and you're going to get images and huge number of choices. You can make it. Just anecdotally, I'm saying, right? So imagine the way our work lives change. Like Vishnu said, it's not going to put us out of jobs, but it's going to make us that much more productive. Hopefully, right? And this is what Sam Altman says. He's our OpenAI CEO, right? The guy says that his objective of doing this or starting this initially was to make sure that people actually get work-life balance. They can do better at shrinking the time they spend on work and then go do other things in life which can be equally creative, productive, and so on. Find better work-life balance. People can do much more nicer things than have to sit in front of the computer and do things which we normally do in our work lives. Not to say that this is not enjoyable, but can you find time windows in your 24-hour cycle where you can actually do things which you probably even enjoy better than what you do at work?
Sure. That was very interesting. I think the aspect that you brought in, especially linking the sustainability element to making the models itself, how lean those models can be. I think that is a huge insight and takeaway for our users. Typically, when we speak of the concerns, Vishnu and Bala, and I'm sure you would also think that you would also face that the typical concerns are about the kind of accuracy you're getting, or is the data copyrighted? Are we infringing someone's IP? But what about the sustainability, moving towards green, and as groups, as responsible enterprises, we have commitment towards that, right? So I think this was a very important, interesting call out for all of us here. That when we are thinking of technology and the progress towards this technology, sustainability has to be de facto built into it. And it can't be like an afterthought, right? And then thank you so much, Bala sir and Vishnu, for beautifully articulating it together. My last areas that I wanted to discuss today is, I have members, panelists today who are doing work in Gen AI day in and day out in two areas: startups and the corporate enterprises. speaking to customers, getting their views. And I think there is a beautiful case for startups and corporates to collaborate on it and complement each other, supplement each other's offerings, and then go to market with the same. Incrementally or even substantially improve the overall collective offering and then go to the system. So, the question that I want to take Bala and Vishnu as your parting remarks on is, how do you see this ecosystem getting developed around it? We have a tech ecosystem wherein the technology is getting emerged, and then we have the startup ecosystem and the corporates. How do you think this ecosystem of collaboration can move forward? Bala, first, your thoughts.
So I'll say probably three, sort of messages or points on this, right? First of all, Aakash, you would know that Cap is quite unique. Capgemini is quite unique in the Indian ecosystem, that we are very, very engaged with our startup ecosystem partners. I'm sure you are aware, we have our Applied Innovation Exchange, which routinely hosts startups not just as a thematic or a fad of the year, but we bring startups through a Shark Tank type process. I won't call it a Shark Tank because we're not investing in every one of them, but we basically shortlisting potential partners for future go-to-market programs. And we not only, once we empanel them, it's a very really rigorous process, but once we've done that, we've empaneled some of these startup partners where in the future, right, at least for the next 36 months, when we see a customer opportunity where we think the startup can actually provide a faster time to market solution, we immediately not only connect the two entities, the customer and the startup partner, but we also host them in our locations anywhere in India. Make sure that the startup is able to identify the business problem better, map their solution, and actually go work with the startups to even integrate their solutions into the rest of the customer landscape. This is point number one, right? The second thing I would also say is when it comes to Gen AI, Aakash, I would say it's not even day one of the test match. Okay, it's just the first few overs of the new ball have been bowled. There's a lot larger, longer runway ahead. You are all reading the regulations that are coming up. There are going to be tons and tons of solutions and offers which we can make. Also, I would say, to go back to that new ball analogy, right? We're all getting probably overwhelmed with ChatGPT. But we have to understand that Gen AI is such a large domain. It's not limited to text. Text is just one form of generative AI.
Of course, yes.
There's images, there's video, there's sound, there's tons of things which enterprises which work with us need support on. For example, we've done a very, very interesting engagement with a large pharma company, right, which is trying to run, a clinical trial for a certain therapeutic area. Now, because of the nature of the therapeutic area, it's not very easy to provide attention to patients who are going through this with humans. We're talking about developed markets, the nurse to patient ratios and so on, not very friendly. In those markets, we've actually developed an avatar, okay, which can provide very, very sensitive inputs. We're not making clinical recommendations with Gen AI, but the Gen AI element has been, introduced to provide this avatar interface. Think of it like a chatbot, but literally like a visual version of the chatbot, right? There's a lady who's like a nurse, who's mimicking a nurse. The content is coming from clinically qualified humans, but the administration, the user interface, the customer or patient interface layer is developed with Gen AI. So these are the kinds of, amazing things which are possible. So there's tons of opportunities where I'm sure startups will be more agile, more nimble, much more focused than what we can do with our own resources. So we will partner with startups like these to go to market where it is relevant, right? It is value. And that's what we want to deliver to our customers. We can't imagine doing everything on our own. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Bala sir, for putting into perspectives and also touching upon how Capgemini has a dedicated structure in place through which we scout these startups, we help them, and we co-innovate and create win-win for the entire ecosystem. So thank you so much for talking to our audiences about that as well. Over to you, Vishnu. How do you see from a startup founder perspective collaborating with enterprises such as Capgemini?
No, I agree with Bala. I would actually add to what he said.
Mm-hmm.
So Bala is looking at it from the corporate side, where he's saying like, we can do a lot more when we collaborate together. And I feel exactly the same way looking at this equation from the startup world. Because that's something we start to realize more and more, right?
Mm-hmm.
As startups, our strength is okay, we can iterate fast, we can build out cutting edge technology, we can identify ideal applications. But identifying applications for a particular industry and then actually positioning a product and an end offering for the customer are still two different things.
Of course. Sure.
And from my experience, we've done engagements where we've built out end offerings for our customers, and we've also collaborated with corporates. When you collaborate with corporates, the time to bridge that gap, right,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially product market fit, that becomes much faster when you collaborate with corporates. So it really is a win-win where everyone can come together and really create something big together. So if we look at it from let's say Subtl Capgemini's context, Subtl's expertise is okay. We've been working in this space for 5 years. We understand how the technologies come here. We know where the technology will go from here. We have a fantastic product roadmap in place. But then when we collaborate with companies like Capgemini, there's the context and the distribution that comes in. Because companies like Capgemini has such a wide reach into the market. Subtle may or may not be able to do that on its own. And even if Subtle is able to do that on its own, what Subtle can distribute in, let's say, 5 years or even 10 years with a partnership with companies like Capgemini, we could probably do in 6 to 12 months together. So it's that beautiful partnership between the pace of innovation and then also working out the evangelizing and the distribution into the market. I think that synergy is where something really big can come in. And this is a proven strategy, right? Even before ChatGPT, startups have always tried to collaborate with corporates and do things with them, right? Really try to package solutions together.
Got it.
So yeah, that would be my take on it. That there's that nice mix of expertise and then also pace that comes together when these two worlds collide.
Right. Right. So I think there is a lot left to be explored, and especially the very interesting new ball analogy. Right, the ball is going to swing more. There is much more twist to this ball, and that's what makes it all the more interesting. Right. So thanks for putting in the punch in there. It really spiked up the imagination of what this potential collaboration could look like moving forward, and what it means for the industry. Because I think the collaboration and the way I think about it is the overall picture, right, is much greater than the sum of its parts. So it's not just an additive summation, but when startups and corporates, when they work together, the kind of impact that they create is much greater than they would have done it individually, right? So perfect. So I think I would have loved to continue it, right? I think there's so much more that we would have talked about, but time is, unfortunately, we are running short of time, and we are almost inching towards the end of the podcast. But if I were to quickly go back and summarize some of the very interesting and important aspects that we discussed, right? Our audiences, right from off the bat, we got to know what is the industry thinking about generative AI. How are they approaching providers of generative AI, such as the Subtles and Capgemini, right? What are the questions that they have? The concerns about generative AI, and how is today the industry taking steps to address it? How is startups pivoted, because generative AI's advent would have been a moment like no another, right? I would go on to say it's a black swan for startups. How do they then pivot around it? And Vishnu gave the two startups, sort of two kind of startups which emerged, and how they would have found adjacencies and created new business models. That was interesting. Apart from hallucinations, we also got a very interesting view of sustainability, which has to be a part of it, and not it's not a choice anymore. It has to be a part of whatever we do with generative AI. And finally, how is it the startups and uh, uh, corporate enterprises, they can work together and make generative AI more accessible, more inclusive, and create more value for the entire ecosystem in the world out there. Vishnu, Balasa, it has been an absolute honor having you here. Thank you so much, and a special call out to our startup incubators, T Hub. T-Hub, as always, has been doing a fantastic job, and this podcast has been possible due to our collaboration and a partnership with T-Hub. So call out to that. Thank you so much, Balasar and Vishnu. It's been so much insightful. I personally got to learn a lot, and I am safely going to say this for our audiences as well. It would have been your insights would have been music to them. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us. Pleasure talking to you, Vishnu. Thank you, T-Hub.
Likewise, Bala. Likewise, Akash. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Glad to have done this.